He was the father of her children and the man she claimed to love. Now he's dead and she's behind bars, accused of taking his life. She allegedly said it was an accident, but many on social media are not buying it. Now the search for the truth begins. I'll walk you through what happened. For Law and Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker. It's a story that's left a community searching for answers. A young father shot and killed, and the woman who allegedly pulled the trigger, his girlfriend, Hannah Cobb. But questions are swirling on social media, like what really happened to Telvin Osborne that night? Why did police wait to arrest his girlfriend? And if this was not an accident, why is Hannah Cobb not facing a harsher charge? According to police, in the early hours of Sunday, February 23rd, 25-year-old Hannah Cobb shot and killed Telvin in the master bedroom of their home, a home which they shared with their two children.
It's just very tragic that he has lost his life in this manner.
In a news conference obtained by WJBF News, Burke County Sheriff Alfonso Williams said the shooting happened after a night of drinking and an argument that turned physical. But how did the gun come into play? Well, according to an incident report obtained by Law and Crime, Cobb allegedly told police that sometime after they returned home, she was checking her firearm, something she claimed the couple did together every night. But get this, despite the incident report clearly stating that Cobb allegedly said she was cleaning her gun when it fired, Sheriff Williams says his office never received any information to support that.
Important for us to clarify that at no point during the investigation was there any information about a person cleaning a weapon.
However, Sheriff Williams made it clear this tragedy is not being ruled an accident.
It's crucial to note that the investigation has not been classified as accidental.
But if this wasn't an accident, then why isn't Cobb charged with a harsher crime like murder? And why was she not arrested on the spot? The delay sparked outrage from the victim's family and the community. Joining us now is legal expert Joe Tamburino. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
So given the details of this case, including the alleged argument and the firearm discharge, why do you think Hannah Cobb has been charged with involuntary manslaughter and not something more severe like murder?
Well, under Georgia law, involuntary manslaughter is basically culpable negligence, and that's very similar to many state laws. And what that means is that what you were doing in an extremely negligent manner, and you were actually committing an underlying crime. So in this case, what the argument is that she was operating a firearm or doing something with the firearm while she was intoxicated, and she discharged it, and obviously it killed Mr. Osborne. So that's why this crime fits for right now. Now, that doesn't mean she won't be charged with others in the future. Prosecutors, based on new evidence, can charge whatever they want as long as the evidence fits it. So right now, this is the charge, but we don't know what it will be in the future.
Yeah, and I think you touched on my next question, just trying to figure out what could the exact elements be that the prosecution may have considered to charge her with that involuntary manslaughter.
Well, the elements would be this, basically, that she was under the influence of alcohol, presumably, that she was using her firearm in a reckless manner, say that's a misdemeanor type crime, and as a result of that, she killed someone because it went off. So even though she didn't mean for the gun to be fired, since she did it in a reckless manner, a culpable negligence type of way, she could be guilty of that crime, and it's up to 10 years in prison. Now, if all of a sudden more evidence comes out, like say, more evidence comes out about an argument, something like that, could possibly the prosecutor go to a voluntary manslaughter, which is more like a heat of passion type situation? Sure, they could do that. So just because you start out with one charge does not necessarily mean that that's the only charge from now till trial.
And the incident report obtained by Law and Crime suggests that Cobb said the gun discharged accidentally while she was checking it, claiming that they did this every night. Do statements like this play a significant role in determining charges in these kind of cases?
Yes, they do. Statements like that, as well as the physical evidence. I am sure there's crime scene investigation, and what they're going to do is try to see where the gun was when it was discharged. Where were her hands when it was discharged? Was the gun, say, lying on her lap when it was discharged? Or was it pointed at point blank range against Mr. Osborne? So many factors are going to go into that. They will also examine Mr. Osborne's body. Was there any type of stippling or evidence on the skin or clothing which would show that the firearm was very close to him? Or did none of that exist? And perhaps he was 20 feet away, which would inure more toward the argument that it was an accidental discharge. All of these factors are going to be highly relevant.
Now, according to reports, it does appear that Ms. Cobb was trying to administer first aid. Does that help her case?
Yes. What happens after an incident is just as important as what happened during the incident. Because if all of a sudden you accidentally, say, shoot someone or injure someone, if you run from the scene, well, that's like a consciousness of guilt. If you act in some callous way and you don't render any assistance, perhaps you don't even call 911 right away, again, that could show an indifference to the harm that was done to the victim. However, if upon discovering that you actually hurt this person and possibly killed him, and you immediately provide assistance, yes, that's relevant to what's called state of mind of the defendant or the suspect.
Now, we already mentioned about, what the incident report said that Ms. Cobb allegedly said about her allegedly trying to clean her gun, something that the couple allegedly did every single night together. But the sheriff held a news conference this week mentioning that there was no information suggesting Cobb was cleaning the weapon, despite, again, that incident report. How significant is that discrepancy?
Very significant on a couple of respects. Number one is you have to be careful when you're a law enforcement agency that before you go out in front of the press, before you start taking questions, you got to get your story right. You got to make sure that you have the reports, you have anything surrounding the incident, as much information as you can, and then you could go out and answer some questions. So you got to make sure that happens. Number two is you have to question, well, where was this incident report? If you have a representative from the law enforcement agency saying, here's what I know about the case, but he doesn't know about the incident report, where was it? It questions who generated that report, where did it go, why wasn't it given to the higher ups in the agency, and so on.
Now, in cases like this, where there's a claim of an accidental shooting, how difficult is it to prove intent in a court of law?
Well, that's going to come back to a few things. Number one, first of all, is the physical evidence, like what we discussed. How exactly was Mr. Osborne shot? Where was he? Was he proximate to where the gun was? Is there any type of physical evidence like stippling, anything on him like that? Where was the gun when Ms. Cobb had it? Was it actually held in her hand? Was it on her lap? Was it on a table? Were there other instruments around the gun, such as cleaning instruments? Were they being deployed at the time of the shooting? All of the physical evidence. Then you go to the next level. The next level is, what were the statements? What were her statements? What was said on 911? There's going to be a lot of information surrounding that. And then you get to the next level after that, which is the surrounding circumstances. In many situations like this, you're going to have search warrants being executed on all sorts of accounts, meaning cell phone, devices, social media, emails, the history of what a person Googled, all of these things. You're going to try to get as much information about this couple's history. Were they always arguing? Was there any type of domestic abuse in the past? Were there any restraining orders? What did this couple say individually to their friends or to their family? What did they say to each other? What were the texts between each other? So that's how you go through physical evidence, the statements, and all of the surrounding circumstances.
And clearly more evidence can come out, as this story unfolds. But in that same news conference this week, the sheriff did mention that there seemed to be no history or no prior domestic violence in their relationship. How does the lack of prior domestic violence reports between the couple impact how the case is being viewed legally?
Well, it will certainly impact the charges, because if there's some long history of domestic violence, like say Ms. Cobb, and we're just saying a hypothetical, say she was arrested in the past, or there were restraining orders against her for committing domestic violence on Mr. Osborne, clearly relevant in a situation like that. But if there were no reports of domestic violence, no restraining orders, nothing of the sort, well, then obviously it would help Ms. Cobb, the defendant, because it would show that there was no animosity between the two. She held no grudges against him. And if there was an argument, perhaps it was just a typical argument that couples have.
And with the delay in Cobb's arrest and the family's public outrage, how does public perception affect the legal process?
Well, in today's world, it affects it a lot. And there are two reasons for that. One is social media. There's no doubt about that. People go on their social media and start saying all sorts of things without knowing the full story. And the second is what's going to happen in court, because Georgia has cameras in the courtroom. So that means that, what the public reads about, what social media says about it will be impacted by what we see in the courtroom. So yes, and it's unfortunate in many situations, but, the public's perception of the case does matter.
And does the fact that the couple had 2 children together, does that matter at all?
Yes, anything surrounding their familial life, anything surrounding what they did as a family, how they interacted, the ties that they had to each other in the community. And clearly, when you have children, your ties as a married couple or a cohabitating couple are stronger because you have living human beings that you have brought into this world. So all of that is relevant in this type of a situation.
And lastly, do you think there's a chance that the charge could be upgraded to anything later on, whether that be murder, whether that be voluntary? Do you think that's possible? And if so, what would need to be proven for that to happen?
It is always possible. In fact, so many times before trial on cases involving a homicide. And remember, a homicide itself doesn't necessarily mean a crime was committed. I mean, for instance, you can have a homicide where it's pure accident. There are no criminal charges at all. A homicide just means a human being caused the death of another human being. But depending upon what comes out of any case involving the death of a human being, sure, you might have charges that happen in the future, a greater manslaughter charge, perhaps an intentional murder charge, things along those lines. So it's always possible, and in many cases it happens.
Great. Well, this is definitely something that we will be following closely. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming on today.
Thank you.
This story has made its rounds on social media and the community, and many people are focusing and commenting on the racial dynamics of the couple and the alleged crime. The delay in the arrest has already sparked significant outrage, but the racial elements of the case can raise broader questions about how racial tensions can influence both public perception and the legal process. Joining me to talk more about this is civil rights and criminal defense attorney Tyler Bailey. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course.
So to start, can you give us your perspective on the racial dynamics at play in a case like this where a white woman is involved in the shooting death of an unarmed black man? And how does this affect the public's perception of this case?
Well, you look at this case and you immediately see racial dynamics. You see a young black man who's in a relationship with a Caucasian woman who's killed. There's no witnesses to the crime. And automatically, the thing that stands out first is she was not immediately arrested. And then they conduct this investigation. It seems that she's given somewhat of a slap on the wrist charge of involuntary manslaughter. And I'm pretty sure we get into the legal dynamics of the case later on, but this is a situation where it seems that law enforcement, with no witnesses, immediately believed the white woman when the black man is dead. And doing the work that I do, civil rights and criminal defense, most of the time people don't believe our stories when they're told initially. We don't get that benefit of doubt. So immediately the public perception is seeing that a white woman is immediately believed when a black man is dead, and there needs to be some accountability.
Yeah, and given the fact that this incident has already gone viral, what role do you think social media and public opinion play in shaping the course of legal proceedings, especially in cases involving racial tension?
Well, Lady Justice has a blindfold and scales in her hands for a reason, but that's just a statute. In real life, public perception, pressure does guide and move prosecutions. It influences the head DA. It influences law enforcement on how they should, approach this case. And although they should just look at the facts and make the best decision based off the information is in front of them, public pressure definitely weighs on people's hearts and minds. It does affect how prosecutions go about. And I think public perception and public pressure already resulted in her being criminally charged because initially they ruled the death as accidental. And so they're saying they're still investigating it. Maybe there'll be more charges. I do think that voluntary manslaughter would have been a more appropriate charge, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the sheriff did hold a press conference this week, and then he made it clear that this was not accidental. So we'll see how things move forward from there. But again, the sheriff also mentioned that there were no prior reports of domestic incidents between the couple. How does that fact, or lack thereof, complicate or shape the public's understanding of this case in the context of race?
I think the public is rightfully confused here because they're hearing facts as far as this shooting not being accidental, and they're really looking at the term involuntary manslaughter when they think it should be murder. In Georgia, there's really only one murder statute, which is murder, and then you have two manslaughter statutes, which is involuntary manslaughter and voluntary manslaughter. And just because it wasn't accidental, they're saying that she acted recklessly and cleaning her gun allegedly when this gentleman was killed. I think really the racial dynamics in the facts of the case. You hear that he comes home around 5 something in the morning after a long night of drinking. They both may have been drinking, I believe, and there was an argument that ensued. And so you logically think that she was upset for whatever reason. He was out all night drinking and coming back late, and she got her gun and she killed him. Now that doesn't sound accidental to me. If anything, at the minimum, sounds like she acted rashly in a heat of passion and shot him, which would have really led to a more appropriate charge of voluntary manslaughter versus involuntary manslaughter, which would have been her acting recklessly, cleaning a firearm that was on safety, and killing him in a reckless manner.
In your experience, how does the presence of racial tension in high profile cases like this one create additional challenges for law enforcement, prosecutors, and defense attorneys?
It really just weighs on them. They watch the news, they have parents, they have friends, they have social media like everybody else. But, once you get past the immediate hoopla from the media, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and everything, and in between, you have to get to the nitty gritty of the case. Most cases are not tried immediately after a murder or investigation. It may be a year or so before this case goes to trial, and the lawyers involved with it will try to, well, at least the prosecutor will try to say, look at the facts of this case. He'll try to eliminate jurors who may be racially motivated one way or the other. And the defense will try to probably use that to also help his client's case out, saying that this woman is being prosecuted for racial tensions that are irrelevant to this case. This was a situation where she accidentally shot him. He'll probably argue that she should have never even been charged with involuntary manslaughter. So the racial dynamics really affect everybody during the investigation and throughout the pretrial phase of the case. But during the trial of it, it's used sometimes to inflame jurors who are sitting there, and also to raise just the profile of the case in general.
And you've been doing this for a long time. You've seen a lot of cases, similar cases where the racial background of the parties involved led to public outcry and led to calls for a different legal response. What can we learn from those situations that might apply here?
Every case is different. And so things ebbs and flows. So if you think about the summer of 2020, when you had George Floyd, you had Ahmaud Arbery, you had all those cases, and there was really a heightened public awareness to, unfortunate racial injustice and racial tensions. We've kind of moved somewhat away from the big public cases where that has happened, and this is a different situation. This is a domestic situation where really the only true sense of racial tension is from the public, from what we're seeing. The public who thinks that this investigation should have been handled differently. There's been no evidence that I have seen yet showing that the accused had any racial animus in her heart and mind when this happened. But we'll see where things go. And then ultimately when they get in that courtroom, judges do give good instructions telling the jurors that they should listen to the facts of this case. that he will make decisions regarding the law, and nothing outside of the facts of the case should guide your decision making when making a decision whether a person is innocent or they should be guilty or what they're accused of. So racial tensions do affect everybody else around the case. They affect things, and they do weigh on everybody who's involved. But ultimately, it's the facts of the case that really stand in every single prosecution and every single defense.
What role do civil rights lawyers play in ensuring justice is served in such charged cases?
Public pressure does work, and ultimately, DAs, defense attorneys, district attorneys, these are people, as far as the prosecution side, who are elected. The district attorney is elected by the people, so that's something they want to make sure is fair. They don't want a segment of the population feeling like the justice system is not equal for them. So generally, most district attorneys do take what the public thinks seriously, and civil rights lawyers, a lot of times, even if they're not involved in the actual criminal part of the case, they do raise the public awareness about injustices. They do oftentimes talk to decision makers, whether that's the elected district attorney, whether that's the assigned prosecutor of the case, and whether that's other local appointed and elected officials about justice that needs to be addressed on the political front. Now, every case is, like I said, handled on its merits. And ultimately, what we want to see is a fair judicial system, and we want a jury that's impartial to make a decision based off the facts of the law. And a lot of times, the civil rights lawyers just really want to pressure, I guess, the system to recognize that, to make sure justice at least has its fair shot of being heard.
And, if we just take it a step back for a moment, I know that a lot of the public outcry has been, what the suspect has been charged with, why did it take so long for her to get charged in the first place? In your opinion, dealing with cases like this, is this how it usually goes when there is a domestic situation like this, that the person does get charged with involuntary manslaughter?
Every case is different, but the law enforcement personnel that is assigned or who responds to a murder or a death usually does take their time to do a thorough investigation. And my understanding is this happened on the Sunday and she was arrested on the Monday. So she was not immediately arrested and charged. There were no witnesses to this crime that we know of yet. We don't know if the children saw it. There's no video evidence. So they do need to be careful before you put somebody's life and liberty at risk. You don't want to arrest somebody and then have to dismiss the case later on if it comes back unsubstantiated. So law enforcement does need time to do an investigation. This would be a different story if there was a video, if there was witnesses who said it happened differently. There was no video, there were no witnesses, and she was ultimately arrested and charged. They did say initially it seemed to be accidental, but they did move forward charges. This was not a situation when there was 3 weeks or a month worth of protests to see that she was charged. There has been some public outcry that seems to be wondering why she wasn't charged immediately, and just looking at the facts of seeing what she was charged with. I don't think the biggest public outcry is that there needed to be a public demonstration of protesters and marches to get the district attorney or the sheriff's department to arrest her and charge this individual.
Correct. And, in the press conference, the sheriff did say that this is an ongoing investigation. So we really don't know what can come from this. But he also mentioned in that same news conference that there seemed to be no prior domestic violence records, within their relationship. Do you think that the lack of prior domestic violence records could be used to downplay the seriousness of the case? Or do you believe it may be used to argue for a different outcome?
I don't think it will be used by either. I mean, the sheriff department saying that to me really is irrelevant. The fact of the case is that he showed up late at night after being out all night around 5 something in the morning. He was drinking and somehow he ends up shot and killed. So the fact of there being no domestic violence doesn't really support anything unless there was supposed to be some theory that she was defending herself against him. And there was other incident reports of the individual who was killed being an abuser to the accused. I don't see any record of that. I think they should really look at this wondering whether she had some motivation and reason for actually shooting and killing this individual that night, not whether she was defending herself, because there's no facts out there that shows that he abused her. Most of the facts to me show that she may have had a reason to shoot him, and she wasn't just cleaning her weapon at 5 in the morning. And Even if she was cleaning her weapon at 5 in the morning, the question is, was she cleaning her weapon to intimidate him, putting the gun out there? Why were you late? Questions like that while she's cleaning the firearm, and then he ends up shot.
Right. Well, just reading everything, it appears that they were both out together. And this is from the sheriff in that news conference. They were both having, a night out together. Alcohol was involved and they came home together. And then this whole alleged incident transpired. So we're definitely waiting to see, what happens and, if more charges are going to be brought against the suspect. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Sheriff Williams says the investigation is ongoing and law enforcement has received search warrants to obtain phone records. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.